Hey there, family. Elder Rod here, also known as the Preacher's Kid, and I would like to welcome you to the next episode of the Dear Preacher's Kid podcast, where we have gathered to talk about all things God, church, religion, family, and whatever else happens to come up during the conversation. So I am pleased to have my friend and brother with me joining today on the podcast, the preacher, the prayer warrior, the author extraordinaire, the preacher par excellence, the prognosticator of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and the pastor of the Overcomers Life Church here in Harvey Robbins. I know I always get to Harvey, Illinois. Would you please help me welcome my friend and brother, Pastor Marcel Fears, to the couch today? Let's give him a hand. All right, nobody's clapping. I'll clap for myself. Man, it is a pleasure, brother. Thank you so much for being here with us today, man.
Man, listen, it's an honor. I think you set me up to fail with all those accolades, but it's an honor. You know, you like a big brother.
We are
to me.
family.
We're
We are
so,
family.
man, it's an extreme honor to be. I'm actually excited.
Yeah,
and, maybe a little nervous at the same time. So we'll see.
This is a little different. This is a little different for us PKs, you know. And so I'll just hop right into it.
Okay.
You know, our families, my family, the Martins, and Pastor Marcel's family, the Fears, we go way back, probably to the early to mid 90s.
Yeah.
If we had to put a time frame on it, I remember I was the minister of music at my father's church at St. Paul, and Pastor Marcel was the drummer at his father's church, right. Redeemed Church. And we started this youth revival in September every year. Me and our former youth director, the late Mother Carrie Perry, went on to be with the Lord. We started a youth revival in the early 90s, and Redeemed became like our sister church in that fellowship. Pastor Marcel's dad used to come to our church every year for a whole week and kill it.
It was a groundbreaking event. I think
he would, and you got to think about what was happening at the time too. You know, you're talking the 80s and 90s when we were still kind of caught up in this whole denominational war. And my dad pastored a Baptist church. Pastor Marcel's dad pastored the Church of God in Christ. And we used to come in there and tear that little red church up. We'd be rolling in the floor. They'd be throwing sheets. As a matter of fact, if we just gonna tell the whole truth, Pastor Marcel's wife.
I found my wife.
Found his wife at our youth revival. Right. Actually, one of my old choir members is his wife.
I found my beautiful wife in that church.
I tell you.
You know, I don't know.
Ain't nothing like church relationships.
That was a good revival.
That was good revival. Souls being saved. My God.
It was amazing. I got great memories of that.
That was such a good time. Like when I think about, you know, how much has changed. You know, we grow up, we move away, I moved away, you know, we get married, we have kids, we do ministry, we start churches. But to grow up the way we grew up in the 90s, where there was such a community. Like you could go anywhere in Joliet and you would know somebody who was a member of that church. Like it was the church hop thing. We chopped from church. On a Sunday, we probably made 7 services a Sunday because each of us just always went to each other's churches. And, you know, when I look at the kind of the climate of our kids and how much of what we had, they don't have. They don't have that sense of, they don't have the youth revivals. They don't have the ACG skating parties at Rosalie's like we used to have. All these events that we used to have. And when I think about what came out of that stuff, like we were kids and we were just trying to find our way with the Lord. And now we're pastors and husbands and fathers and captains of industry and preachers and all of these things from those humble beginnings.
So much is different. I think about that time a lot because really in the early mid 90s, there still was such a divide denominationally.
Yes,
and absolutely. I think because there was not as much exposure in media. We were still in our clusters, but that revival in particular you talked about brought together 2 denominations and kind of kind of brought some walls down in a sense.
Absolutely.
If you think about it, although I don't know in that context at the time, I can really see it that clearly.
Yeah.
But
You don't think about it. Just kids having church.
Just
like to have
kids
church.
having church.
Yeah,
so many good things came out of it, man. So it was an amazing thing.
Nothing like it.
Yeah.
So you're the son of a pastor. I'm the son of a pastor. My dad is retired. Your dad is still pastoring.
Yes, he is.
So this is a little bit different than the conversation with my brother because I knew what our house was like. But you've got a fairly large family as well.
Sure.
And as a matter of fact, I think most of the black families in the church in the 80s and 90s, I don't think nobody had like 1 or 2 kids.
Yeah.
Everybody had like 5, 6, 7,
5 of us. 5 and 4 boys and a girl.
4 boys and a girl. So tell me, what was life growing up like in the Fears house?
You know what? I talk about it because when I think about it, it was very, very humble. We grew up on the south side of Chicago.
Okay.
And many people don't know a lot of our backstory, but we grew up on the south side of Chicago. At the time, God had, as we say, called my father to be evangelist. And at that time, he was called to be a full-time evangelist. He was not pastoring.
Okay.
And it was not like it is now in terms of full-time ministry. He had a lot of critics, especially when you have a wife and 5 children.
Kids,
it was a lot of, you should get a job. Man don't work, he don't eat. You should have a 9 to 5. And so to go along with that, we were living in our grandfather's house. We all stayed out of one room. It was 7 people in one room. We had a set of bunk beds, 2 boys on the top, 2 boys on the bottom. We had another day bed with my sister, and then we had a bed all in the same room.
All in the
with
same
my mom and dad in the room and on the south side of Chicago. That's how we grew up. We didn't have a lot. We knew about government cheese and powdered milk and but we didn't look at it about what we didn't have. All I know is our father was kind of like steadfast on the call, and he said that the Lord told him that if he would preach, that God will provide abundantly.
Wow.
And that was his testimony. And so I was his first adjutant, if you will, his first armor bearer. Right, exactly. So I'm 5, 6 years old, and we didn't even have a car. I would be on the bus. He would be preaching revivals, and we have to run out the church and get on the bus at the visiting church before anybody sees us.
Wow.
From preaching. So that was my life. That's how I grew up. And with that kind of firm foundation of faith and humility, which now carries over to me, not really getting overhyped on anything that God allows me to have now or not have, because just how I grew up. Yeah.
Wow. That is really something. And so, having said that, it's a given that, faith was central.
Absolutely.
And when you think about us, the Martin household, 5 boys and no games, no jokes. Daddy did not play with his boys. Like, we had structure and I think one of the things I think about with my childhood was just the discipline I think my dad taught us. The discipline of making ministry priority.
Yeah.
Like, my dad worked and did full-time and pastored the church. So you're talking about in the 80s where you got 4 boys at home. Like, Mike wasn't even born yet when Daddy started pastoring. So you've got 4 boys at home. My dad was a full-time chef during the day. He would go to work at like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, get off at 1 or 2 in the afternoon, and go straight to the church.
Wow.
And be at the church from 1 o'clock until 6 or 7. Whether they had choir rehearsal, they had Bible class, he had meetings. And he did this for years.
Yeah.
So in my mind, it was always like church, everything else.
Sure.
And priorities, like we got to run track, we got to play basketball, we got to do those little bitty things. But when it came to church, like nothing took precedence over that. And I think the work ethic that I have today is because, like, I saw my dad do like 7 things at once.
Yeah,
like, he would go to work, he would do the church, and then he had a friend who had a catering business. So Dad, because he chefed, he would go and help him every couple of weeks go do catering events. And so my dad always had his hands in something. But there was that priority of ministry, lots of laughter. Now, you've been around us.
I know.
All we do is laugh. There was a lot we couldn't do.
Sure.
But one of the things we could do was laugh.
you know what? I think about that a lot. We had a fun household.
Yeah.
We're loud.
You know? Yes.
But
loud household.
I think a lot of what we could not do. It was the culture of the times in a Pentecostal church. We were in a Pentecostal / holiness, whatever you want to call it, type of church. And during that time, our parents was raised a certain way. I'll tell you, and I'm to the extent, I did not go to a movie theater until I was out of high school.
I think I was like 16 or 17. I remember the movie Malcolm X.
I remember the movie.
Malcolm X.
Listen, it wasn't that, and I don't fault my parents more than what the culture
dictated.
Was.
That's what you do.
It dictated. It was a lot that we didn't go to all of the dances. We know we can go to prom. Prom was about it.
What was that?
So I mean, but I think about the culture of it, and versus how they were raised versus our mentality now as culture, life, and church has evolved. But it can't replace, and it didn't replace or lessen the love that was in the house.
Absolutely,
how it was built. But listen, there were some things you just could not do, and
at all,
and that's what it was. And it seems to me that you were always, as a pastor's kid, preacher's kid, you just had a mark on you. You were always marked,
man.
And sometimes that would lead you personally to, I guess someone would call rebel.
Yeah.
That's only because you're trying to distance yourself as far away from, right, what the picture that has been painted for what you should be.
Yes.
And so, I mean, that was something that you choose to do because you don't understand the value of the mark.
Yeah. Woo!
Right?
I wish I had a button or a bell. I need a button or a bell for that one. You don't understand it.
You don't understand the value because I remember my dad, he would drop me off for school sometimes, and sometimes he'd be preaching all week. He was, of course, as you know, an itinerary evangelist. He would be all over the country and all over the place, but he would drop us off for school, and they would ask us, my brother and my sister, so what does your dad do for a living? We used to be like, he's an entrepreneur. We didn't want to tell anybody he was our preacher. But that's just trying to live in a world
that is so funny.
Where you are trying to fit in.
We couldn't because Daddy showed up at our track meets in a suit and a tie.
Well, you already know.
Dude, seriously, what? I'm outside. Why do you have on a vest and a tie and a shirt and a button up?
Yep.
Sitting in these bleachers, everybody knew, your daddy a preacher.
Yep. So you couldn't get away from that. I would tell people when it came to 90s was R&B. I mean that was the best time.
It was the best time,
and so
but we know it.
look. I would tell people the songs that I knew had to be the hit songs because they were on the radio and radio.
Yes,
so
sir.
When they were not around, I can turn on MTV.
Yo, MTV Raps and Rap City.
So if you ask me the songs, I only know the songs on the record that were the hit songs because the rest of the songs I didn't have. So that's how those just are the life we live,
I bought a CD player. I was 16. This is when CDs first became the thing. I bought this CD player and I went to Radio Shack. Radio Shack. That's how long ago this was. I went to Radio Shack and I bought BB and CC Winans. They had just released this CD called Different Lifestyles. And the song Addictive Love was on there. And I loved that song for some reason. So what did I do? I got the CD player for Christmas. I went and bought the CD and I'm home in my room, 16, just jamming out to Addictive Love. And Mama come down the steps.
Oh yeah, I know what they were saying about that.
And stood by the entrance of the door, and I'm just sitting there. And she's like, "What is this you listening to?" And I'm like, "Mama, this is what." I had to dress it up because the Saints back then today didn't really feature BB and CC.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
They like the Winans, the brothers. That's who they liked. And so I said, "Mama, this is one of the Winans," and she said, And she sat there and listened for a little while. She said, and I said, "What's going on?" She said, "I'm just standing here waiting for him to say Jesus at some point." And I was like, well, you might want to move because you ain't going to hear this.
You're not going to hear that from BB and CC.
But they had definitely a certain view of what the gospel looked like, of what salvation looked like, of what someone who said they were living a life for Christ. Like Living Color, we had to sneak and watch Living Color.
Absolutely.
When Martin came out, I had to buy a TV and put it in my room, and we had to sneak and watch Martin because my mama said Martin had a nasty mouth. So we do have, there is a culture kind of, especially if you're growing up as a church kid, like early on your do's and your don'ts.
It's a culture. I remember a funny story. You brought up the TV shows. Funny story. We were excited because Fresh Prince of Bel-Air first came out. Everybody was talking about it. And at the time when it first came out, it came out on Monday evening.
Yes.
And it just so happened that mom and dad decided they were going to start having prayer in the house.
On Monday evening?
On Monday evening at 7:00.
Right when Fresh Prince came on.
My brother and my sister and I, we were so furious. Thankfully, eventually that day changed.
Prayer changed.
But prayer time changed. So we can watch Fresh Prince. But we were praying, Jesus.
Oh, God.
Doing Fresh Prince. But I mean, that it was a culture that was set. You were in that sanctified household, if you will.
Yes, sir.
And so that's it came with that.
Yeah. So thinking about that, like I think about I always say I accepted Christ early. I was 7 years old. I remember it like it was yesterday. And I had just this is when Bishop Willie James Campbell was still alive. And this is when St. James was on the west side of Chicago. They were on Roosevelt Road at the time. I was like 7 or 8. And me and my older brother and a couple of other people from St. Paul went to St. James one Sunday night. And I remember my older brother, Anthony, let me tag along with him finally because I've been begging to go.
By the way, everybody, St. James in Chicago was the place to be on the Sunday night.
Place.
Bishop Willie James Campbell, God rest his wonderful memory.
That was a preaching machine. And I remember we walked into that church, and I don't even remember all the details, like what made that night different. Because again, it was like 84. It was like I was 7.
Sure.
And we grew up in Prayer Tower. I think we had just left Prayer Tower by this point. And so we were used to like the green sheets, people rolling in the floor. So all the church, that was familiar to us. But something happened to me that night. Like I felt God in a way I couldn't even describe.
Wow.
And I remember Bishop Campbell was up and he said, jump up and say Jesus. And so people jump up and say Jesus. He sat back down. That one time never made it for him. It had to be about that third time he said, jump up and say Jesus. I don't know what happened to me. Your boy was gone. I was in the aisle. The saints had the circle, and I heard one of the mothers in the background yelling, "Get it, baby, get it!"
Oh yeah.
And I was just out of it. And I remember the next day I went home, and by the time I got the chance to tell my parents what happened, my older brother had already told it.
Wow.
And so my mama was, when you get touched for the first time by the Lord, the saints act like you done graduated, like you done won a scholarship. So I remember I got up the next morning, I'm in the hallway and mama just standing in the door grinning.
Proud.
That the Lord done touched you, baby. And literally 2 months later, I made the decision. I wanted to give my life to Christ. And I always say, I think I needed to get saved early.
Sure.
Just because there was so much I would experience after that would try to chip away at that moment.
Sure.
And so whenever I get to the point where I'm like, agitated, or even, in my moments where I really struggled in my walk with God, I always go back to that moment.
Well, listen,
like what I felt that day, I'll never forget it.
You're a little different from me. I got saved at least 6 or 7 times.
Oh yeah. Now that was the first time. Don't get me wrong. It was like many refillers after that. But
yeah. I mean, when I was about 18, I started to lock in.
Yeah.
Well, we all get saved a few times coming through your childhood.
At least every January. When we was at Prayer Tower, Elder Gordon would come through Prayer Tower every January, and he would run a revival for the whole month.
Wow.
And everybody who got filled with the Holy Ghost got filled with the Holy Ghost in January when Elder Gordon came to Prayer Tower. But you grow up in that mindset of just like, going after God and seeking after God. And then I remember like me being a teenager and knowing like the hand of God was on my life, but just wanting to be normal.
Sure.
Like not wanting to be like, it's very difficult for you to explain to an 11 or a 12-year-old what it means to be set apart and different.
Yeah.
And so I didn't get it as set apart and different. I thought I was weird. Like I didn't want to do the stuff that most everybody was doing. Like I had things I wanted to do and they all wasn't church, but for the majority, my sphere of influence was real tight.
Yeah.
And our parents kept a good rein on what we were exposed to. And so, 11 or 12, I want to go to revival. My punishment, my parents never had to take stuff from me. They just had to keep me from going to choir rehearsal.
Well, that's one of the lessons as I begin to mature and grow in God, that God is really teaching me, and that is embracing your difference.
Yeah.
Because when you're, as you said, when you're coming up, matriculating, trying to learn how to be saved and become a disciple of God, you don't understand your difference is what elevates you and promotes you.
Right.
And so you have to learn to embrace your difference, your uniqueness, and what sets you apart. And that becomes your ally in life, your difference, and not your sameness. Right? So that's a lesson you learn, and then you try and take that and articulate that to others around you now and your children about how being different is your actually life's ally. And not your sameness. So
and that's a hard lesson. That's a hard lesson when you want to fit in.
Yeah.
And when when the culture kind of pushes you to fit in.
Absolutely.
And you're like, I'm different, but I won't be myself either. So there's kind of like that dichotomy of a decision you have to make, like, how am I going to navigate this? And I remember that space, and then having to navigate that. Coming to faith is one thing all on its own, but then navigating coming to faith and then being a part of the first family of the church is a little bit different, because I think at some point you become the measuring stick for other families in the church about what a saved young person's supposed to look like. And so for me, like, I had ACG going and I was directing St. Paul. And so now everybody's like, be like Rodney.
Sure.
And that's pressure. When you are still trying to come into your own and still trying to like navigate, I know I'm called, but what does God have specifically for me to do? And then for me, it was like, and I don't want to be like my dad.
Sure.
I love my dad, but I didn't want to do ministry the way my dad did it. But he was also my blueprint.
Yeah.
So if you don't know nothing else, how do you really experience or expect something else? So it was, I'd have no regrets. I have absolutely no regrets about growing up as a preacher's kid, but I definitely can attest to the pressure to be perfect.
Yeah. I think so when you told me we were going to have this conversation, I said, okay, let me pause and actually really think about it, because hustle and bustle, life, moving forward, doing purpose, doing what you're called to do, I don't often get an opportunity to sit quietly and actually think about, how do I feel about it? Right. And I think after I got to the bottom line, I embraced, I loved and appreciated everything that I experienced. I think if there was one thing that I could say that I wish was different, although it helped make me, was the idea of living in a glass house. And I think in a sense, I was involved in helping create that, because what translates over to your current life that I had to be free from is learning how to fail.
Wow.
Because when you are a pastor's kid, you don't know how to fail correctly.
And you don't even really, if we could just tell the whole truth, you don't have a lot of space to fail.
You don't have a lot of space to fail.
Absolutely.
So whether or not it is actual pressure or self-inflicted pressure, right?
Yes.
It is still a reality that once you fail as an adult, it could be devastating. Because you never had an opportunity to learn how to publicly fail. And I think I had to get free of people.
Yes, sir.
And the unfair expectations of people. And then I had to get free of my own unfair expectations, as the word you use, of perfection. I think that is the thing. I don't know if it's knowingly or unknowingly it happens, but it is a very real thing.
Yeah. And I definitely can attest to that. And even like when I consider my own call to ministry, and I've admitted it on our last episode, but I'm going to say it again for the second time. The reality is, so me and my sister Michelle started a community choir back in 1996 called The Chosen Generation.
ACG.
ACG.
That's a bad choir,
ACG
you all.
forever. There will never be another ACG.
That's a bad choir, ACG.
But the reality is this. ACG started because I did not want to preach.
Wow.
And the reality was, I knew God had called me to bring young people together. And I knew God had called me to minister to young people. But I did not want to take that on. And so what I did was, let me do something that's natural to me. Create a choir, because I was already directing the choirs at Dad's church. Let me create a community choir where I can gather all my friends and we can come together and sing and we can grow in the Lord and we can study the word of God. But I ain't got to pastor. I ain't got to preach to them.
Wow.
And it literally was like a year and a half into ACG, and God was like, this is not. This was not how this was supposed to play out.
You know, that's incredibly interesting, because ACG, those of you that are listening, this brother here had one of the most exciting, young, prolific choirs in our area and community.
Those were good days,
and it was super inspiring. I don't know. I think God has a way of taking. God is not wasteful.
Oh, God.
He uses everything in our life. And I think that even that that season was so inspiring.
Absolutely.
So many people. So his hand was involved somewhere in there.
Absolutely. And ACG was good for me because I think I felt the responsibility of what it meant to lead God's people. So it made me tighten up my own walk. I was like, people are watching me. And, when I think about like all of the people that came out of ACG that are pastoring, that are preaching, that are, administering in church, and we all started off as teenagers, realistically just looking for an outlet to find people who thought like us. Because really, if we thought about it, ACG was the place where the church kids didn't feel so weird. We were in an environment where people got us.
Absolutely.
If we decided we was going to cry in the middle of a song, wasn't nobody going to stop it.
I think, we've talked about the conversation of difference, and you're highlighting that there's many people that are going to be watching and listening to this podcast. And I will hope that they would hear this and know that their difference does not disqualify them.
Oh, God, no.
From their future. I think knowing that there are other people who are like-minded, knowing that there are people who are traveling a road that you travel, helps you feel and know that you're not alone.
Absolutely.
And so many people suffer in silence because they don't know that their difference is a shared community.
It's a community.
I think what God used you to do with that community choir was so powerful, as you just said, and bringing people together in a community that can help us lean on one another in a space where we're trying to figure it out ourselves.
And I mean, like, people met and got married out of ACG. Like, we legitimately did life together, and I believe part of what God honored was the purity of our hearts. Like, I don't think any of us had a selfish agenda. We really just wanted a space. And if we could be really honest, like, ACG was a space that a lot of us weren't getting in our local churches. So we got the space to be young and love the Lord without all of the extra stuff that sometimes being young and loving the Lord came with in our churches. And so, like, we got to go around and sing at churches while people were going to parties. Like, we were renting buses, driving to South Bend. Worst trip ever. But that kind of set the tone for how I started to view ministry. I think ACG gave me a picture of what life walking with God looked like outside of church. And, knowing that I had been called to preach, but kind of struggling with a system called church just because of how I felt like, or all of the impositions I felt like church kind of put on me. Like, you got to do this. You got to walk this way. You know, I was young and I was a young man, and you want to date and you want to court, but you can't do any of that because somebody's always watching you. You can't walk through the mall with your girl to hold hands because the saints is looking at you. Saints don't do that. You can't. Doing something I had no business doing. I'll preface this by saying that. But me and this young lady, making out, and one of the saints sees us. So it was almost like I needed to be someplace, which kind of drove me away from my dad's church. Was I need to be someplace where I'm just a member. I need to be someplace where I'm equal with everybody else. Like, I don't want to sit at the head table during the banquet. I don't want to get called up to stand with the family at the pastor's anniversary. I don't want no special seat. Don't give me no boutonniere, no flower. I have done that.
Sure.
And so I think part of me was that I had to unlearn and relearn. Like, I had to unlearn a lot of legalism and restrictions, and I had to relearn what relationship with God looked like. And then I even think about with my daughter, and the things I had to do differently with her than things my parents did with me. Number one, because she was a girl and I was a guy. Number two, because she grew up in a different time than me, and I knew I could not throw church down her throat. Like, the expectation of her being in church 3 or 4 days a week like we were, I knew that would never work with her. I knew she would never find relationship with God if I tried to do it the way it was done to me.
Sure.
And so I guess I had to divorce myself. So you as a father, you as a parent, how does that translate into the way you raise your sons?
Yeah, I think one thing my father and my mother did do was kind of created an atmosphere where we can develop our love for Christ on our own.
Okay. Yeah.
Without being forced to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And love the church. Quite honestly, I look at it and I'm so grateful because for example, our relationship that we have even now is because of the church.
It's because of church.
There's so many relationships that I would have never had with so many amazing people that I have today.
Yeah.
Because of the church. But I think what happens is my parents, they were blessed to raise us to have our own voice. Okay. To express ourselves, to not feel forced.
Yeah.
Right. To kind of show us what the path is, but then let us make our own decisions. And let us state our whys and our why nots. Right. And so, of course, all in a respective culture, but we were able to kind of develop that, and I think that's important.
Yeah.
That has translated to how I raise my sons.
Absolutely.
I have 2 sons, and raising African American sons in the United States of America.
Yes, sir.
Right now is already a task.
It's a task on its own. Yes, sir.
On its own.
Yes, sir.
But I think that I wanted to show them the way as well, give them that same freedom to express.
Yeah.
And in turn, they begin to develop their own love for God and love for the church. And I think a lot of that also goes into being a person of integrity in your house.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'll tell this, and this story I had, because you're always going to have the antagonist.
Yeah.
Especially that there is a real enemy, Satan.
Yeah.
That realizes that you are different. That there is a call on your life, and there will always be people that may be, in the way of what God is trying to do for you. And I can remember having it was always somebody in the church that, kind of pick with you, And I was being picked with.
I ain't gonna say a name, but listen, I know who you are.
And listen, I was quiet, but I fight you. Okay?
Yeah.
I fight you. I'm the most quiet person out of the 5, but you got to be careful of them quiet people because they'll blow up on you. And I was being picked with over and over, and a situation happening. And this time I couldn't contain myself. I got so upset.
Every now and then you got to get them.
Listen.
I'm a witness.
My fist was balled up.
I'm a witness.
Listen, and we were in the sanctuary too. So for whatever it was.
Yeah.
And my brother Maurice, God bless you, Reese. My brother Maurice said, Sel, he said, go to the office. My dad's office was upstairs, and I was so furious. Tears were coming out. I was so furious because I wanted to just go. and I was a young teenager. And so I ran to my father's office. It was on a Sunday morning, right before he used to come down to preach.
Yeah.
I ran in his office, bust open the door, tears to come down my eyes. And I said, Dad, I'm so upset. And I explained to him what happened. My dad looked at me and he said, Marcel, he said, you're not wrong. He said, you're not wrong. He said, and you're my son. He said, you're my responsibility. And I'm going to have a conversation about it.
Yeah.
I think what that taught me was it's not about what people do to you.
Yeah.
It's going to be how
you respond
to my children.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes,
So
sir.
when I seen my dad say that he did not say, hey, why are you causing this ruckus in my church? Why are you bringing a bad image? Why are you not? That's not what he said.
Yeah.
I think had he went on that approach, I would not have been the person I am today.
Wow.
And so what I carried over was, whatever happens, affirm your children.
Yes.
Let them know that you're their father before you're their pastor.
Shing-a-ling-a-ling.
And so
that's a good one.
I think I always said to myself, I'm going to be there for my children.
Yes.
I'm not going to let anybody crush them on purpose.
Yes.
I'm going to stick up for my children, and I'm going to treat them like anybody else's child who can mess up.
Yes.
But I'm not going to let them be ostracized.
For the sake of ministry.
For
like
the
you
sake
can't
of
beat
ministry.
up on my kids for the sake
You're
of ministry.
their father before you're their pastor.
Yes.
I think that singular moment, Rodney, was the moment that made me realize what it was all about. He was willing to sacrifice what his pastoralship looks like for the sake of his son.
Yes.
And that stuck with me.
Yeah.
And that made me understand that I should apply that same method and principle to my children.
Wow. That is powerful.
Yeah.
And I got a similar story.
Yeah.
That was one thing I'll say, Dad was tough on us, but he wasn't gonna let nobody else do it.
That's it.
Like at the end of the day, he was gonna say what he felt like he needed to say to us, but you wasn't gonna say it to us.
That's right.
And you definitely wasn't gonna say it to us in front of him. Because he had a problem with that. And so again, I think you kind of learn how to, which I think is a valid point, like for pastors, like don't make your kids the sacrificial lamb of your ministry.
That's the key.
Yes.
That's the key. It's being their father
and
their mother before you're their pastor. And that's really doing all that you can to be there for them, to pause and to listen.
Yes.
No matter how long it takes, that you're
Yes.
never too busy. And I think that goes a long way in creating fun in your household.
Absolutely.
Identity and a culture in your household that makes all the difference. And that'll translate to how they respond. And I'm telling you another thing, having good church helps. Okay.
Yeah.
Because if you're in the church growing up and you're a pastor's kid and it's boring.
Let's just say it.
Okay.
It's boring.
You might not want to be that. You might not.
No.
I won't even blame you if you never want to see that again. But when you've had a wonderful experience in terms of there was some energy there. You had some youth groups.
Oh, we was going down to Redeem. It was going down.
That really helped, because even other kids our age, they would go to college. When they got to college, they came back. Because it was such a powerful experience. And I think if you can help it, right? If you can help it, make sure your church is a place where there is an authentic move of God. Because the authentic move of God will kind of cover up a lot of human mistakes, right? In terms of the love for the church and God still being there. But, I found out as I began to travel the country more and talk to more people that everybody did not have the same experience. So how do they come back, right, and have that love when their experience was not the same? And so I've learned to have a different level of empathy and understanding in terms of everybody's experience.
Yeah. And just like the story you were talking about with your dad that came to your defense, I know a lot of PKs who don't have that story. Where the church mothers came to the young ladies and said something cross, and then they went back to their parents, and their parents was like, "You're supposed to obey." And so that creates a dichotomy, and then it creates this tension with the church.
Absolutely.
Which ultimately translates to this tension with God.
Absolutely.
Because everybody isn't emotionally intelligent enough to separate the two.
Absolutely.
And so if church makes me mad, now God has made me mad.
Yes.
So I won't have nothing to do with God because of how y'all act.
Listen, I think and that's why healing is so important. One of the reasons I wanted to make sure I was a part of this conversation is because I know there are so many. Of course, we're not a monolith. We have different experiences and opinions, but I think there's a lot of healing that actually needs to happen for people. How they perceive and receive certain things, information, how it impacted them.
Absolutely.
And the proper form to express how it made them feel. And I think I always just wanted to continue to offer a voice of support and encouragement to let people know that they are seen. That we do have a bond and a real community when it comes to preachers.
It's a community.
Pastors,
yes,
kids.
sir.
And also that you can be healed of it, right? You can be healed in that place, because sometimes we forget to allow our parents to be human.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That they possibly have made mistakes sometimes.
Absolutely.
And when I became a parent, I realized
that's when you get it. When you become a parent, you divorce a lot of your critiques you had on your parents.
I remember one time my wife and I, we talked, we said, I hope that don't impact them negatively, because sometimes you make decisions that you wish you would have made a different decision, right? And you're praying that it doesn't have a negative impact on their future. So as you mature and you get older, you have children, you do kind of allow your parents to be human.
You give them grace, because I remember like growing up, especially my dad. Like my mom, I was always pretty much been a mama's boy. Like to this day, I can't do no wrong in my mama's eye. But dad was always the one. Like my dad was raising men.
Yeah.
And he was real adamant about the fact that I'm raising men. Sure. I'm not raising no little boys, and I'm not raising no people who are just going to have babies all over town. I'm going to raise men of integrity. I'm going to raise men that pay their bills. There was a discipline that came with that he was big on. And I was just like, why is he so hard on us all the time? Like, can't do this, can't be here, can't be seen there, can't, all these can'ts. Yeah. But now,
you see.
Woo! When I look at all the kids, and I had my 30th class reunion 2 months ago.
Wow.
I look at all of the people I went to school with who didn't have what I had. And I saw them and was like, good God Almighty.
Yeah, you can appreciate it.
I can appreciate the limited structure. Not limited structure rather, but limited environment that I can appreciate them guarding who we hung with, guarding where we went, not letting us spend the night, making us go to church on Sundays, locking the door at 1 o'clock in the morning so we can get up and go to work and be on time because we had a curfew. And we knew there were repercussions if you did not meet your curfew. It wasn't just we just gonna sit down and talk about it.
Quite possibly we may be missing a little bit of that today. In our society that structure, discipline. It's playing out. So you have your pros and cons in terms of the involvement of liberality and the age of information, but at the same time, some of those old school principles that we may
some of that stuff works. I don't care what nobody says. Some of that stuff worked.
So some of
a whole lot of it worked, and we could tell the whole truth. A whole lot of it worked.
Now I'll tell you this. My sons were going to the movies early. I mean, it was so many things that you find out. I remember my brother and I, because of course, in your local church, but also in the Church of God in Christ, the schedule is insane.
Workers meeting, women's convention, AIM convention,
everything,
jurisdictional convocation, district meetings.
And so you grow up thinking that if you miss any of that you're
going to hell.
Right,
you're going to hell.
So I remember my brother and I, we were grown with kids. This is grown with kids. Yeah. And so our kids were younger at the time, but it was a random Monday, and I think it was some type of rehearsal for a state meeting.
Okay.
And so I decided in my own house, and my wife and we married with children. We said, we're going to the auto show, right? So we're going to go to the auto show, and because I'm grown, I just realized I'm going to the auto show today. So I went to the auto show, and then when I got there, we were walking through the mall, and lo and behold, I run into my brother.
Y'all was both getting free that day.
We looked at each other and we laughed because we said, "Oh, so we don't have to go." Like and
it could go on without you. It could go on without you.
It was this moment like, Oh, you don't have to give everything. And of course, I am an advocate of faithfulness.
Advocate.
But when I realized that you don't have to go to everything and you can still be saved.
You can still be saved.
Woo-wee.
They can actually have a service without you.
That thing.
And they'll be all right. Church will go home.
Church will be fine.
Church will be fine.
Really? So we just we didn't even have a conversation first. We laughed first and then had a conversation. But we should evolve though.
Yeah.
We should evolve in our thinking. We should have a clearer picture and understanding of how we are navigating these times with our children in the current culture.
Yeah. I'm going to wrap up this question. I got one last question for you. I'm curious to hear what you got to say. Sure. You got 2 sons, fine young men helping you work in ministry. If one of your boys came to you and said, Dad, I feel like I'm called to preach, I'm called to pastor, what's your response to them?
Well, I'm going to do them like my dad did me when I was called to preach. I was called to preach when I was 19 years old.
Oh, gosh, I remember.
The Lord spoke to me, right? And I went to him and he told me like they did old school. He said, you believe God told you? I said, yes. He said, go back and pray.
Go back and pray.
I didn't preach my first sermon until I was 22.
Wow.
I waited 2.5 years.
What did that preparation look like for you?
It was hard. It was,
I know it.
It was hard. It was what seemed to me a little isolating because my mind, I really embraced the call of God in my life right at that time. But you're 19, 20 and you want to do.
You want to live.
Yeah, what everybody else is doing. Nothing wrong, but you just want to live. But I found myself a lot of times preparing. But a lot of times I don't have to do though with what God has called you to. I learned later that I had to be that way because of what I believe to be the magnitude of the call that I entered into. But that was a very rough period of time. And there was a lot of failure in between because while I'm trying to be consecrated and separated, I'm still
You're still human.
Failing. And I'm still moving out of that space until I actually came and was released into ministry when I was 22. So I would tell my children to know it's God because at the end of the day, if and my father would always tell me this, he would say, he said, if God calls you, he said, you can be called to preach, I can teach you, I can train you. He said, but I cannot anoint you.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
If it's not God endorsed, then it will not be God sustained.
Absolutely.
And I think to really even answer your question, Ronnie, I think that some of the reason why we have seen so many pastors not make it, not continue, not last. Are we moving with the grace for that area? We have to ask ourselves that, because could it be that your assignment was to support? Or your assignment was to build. The world is a harvest. Was it to build at other places? Because if God calls you to a thing, he will grace you.
Absolutely.
And sustain you.
Absolutely.
When you can't even hold on to yourself. So I would encourage my children to really depend on leaning on know the voice of God, be supportive, and hopefully you have a leader, and I hope I will be that leader to my son, that can still have the foresight to see where you are, to guide you. And I think that would be my response. And because I can't, it's God's call. I know we can get educated, and I'm a champion of education because I'm finishing some theology.
Listen, I just got my MDiv 5 months ago.
Congratulations. I'm a few months from my master's.
Yes, sir.
In Christian ministry, but it's you can do all of that. But if there's not a call, then you'll be in trouble.
And realistically, this is not the thing you want to do if you haven't been called.
Oh, it is not.
I mean, I got other stuff I could be doing that I could be very successful
I'll tell you this, because the weight of it, if not called to it, will crush you.
It will crush you.
Yeah.
It will absolutely crush you.
It will crush you.
And if you're called to it, you'll find a way to juggle it all.
Yes, you will.
Like I watched my dad juggle a wife, 5 kids, 2 jobs, and a church.
If you're called to it.
But he was called to it. And so what looked impossible to everybody else watching him do it, God graced him to do it.
Small little nugget. When I started pastoring, there was about 3 people that I went to speak to directly. I've been pastoring for 10 years as a senior pastor, and I spoke with 3 people, and one of them was your father.
Wow.
I went to his church and to speak, because I've always admired how he carried himself, his stance, and I went to speak with him. And one of the first things he said, "Well, you don't need me. Talk to your dad." That's what
my dad loves your dad. Let me tell you.
And then after, yes, he does. And after he said that, he gave me some nuggets. But he was one of the few people that I talked to at the onset. Many people don't know that, but I was led to talk to him just because of what you just said.
Yeah, he's a wealth of wisdom, and Daddy's gonna give it to you straight.
Yeah, absolutely.
When I went to tell him, he was like, "Oh," he said, "Well, I mean, I knew it, but," he said, now that I think about it, he said something to me. He said, "I've always known, but it wasn't for me to say nothing. Wow. It was for God to show you."
Wow.
And that part was like, wow. Like, which meant in my mind, he was more concerned with allowing God to reveal his plan for my life to me than him putting the pressure on me to say, "I see it in you."
Yeah.
And, even growing up in the church, like when you're young and there's a difference on you, the saints are good for calling it out.
Yeah, they are.
God got something for you to do, baby. You hold on, because there's a work. And sometimes those phraseologies in themselves become pressure.
Sure, absolutely.
Because you're like, "Oh, God got something for me to do. What I need to do to get right to do it. I need to fix this. I need to fix this. I need to straighten this up. I need to tighten this up." So you're trying to do all these things to rectify what you know to do in your own natural senses instead of just letting God mature the call in you.
Absolutely.
Man. Well, brother, I thank you so much for being here, man. This has been an absolute pleasure. This is not the first or last time we're going to do this. We're going to have some more group conversations. We are out of time, but we are not out of conversation. So I'm going to bid you all farewell. Join us on the next episode of the Dear Preacher's Kid podcast. Take care.